Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the Explicit Measures podcast with Tommy, Seth, and Mike. Hello.
Good morning, man. I am awake and ready to go this morning. It's almost like I've been up for a while.
That is a precursor to, we just did a recording for another video, and so there'll be an episode recorded next week. So
I haven't slept since the fabric announcements.
yeah, that's what I meant.
Staring into the abyss.
I got to be honest, after that, was it Tuesday when a lot of things got announced?
Mm-hmm.
I was very hyper, and I had a hard time going back to sleep. There's been very few times where I've been so extremely excited about things. I felt like, I think I've said this before, there are times where when Microsoft was originally building Power BI Desktop, there's a lot of features that came out that were like, wow, that's cool. I'm really excited about this. I'm looking forward to using this. And there's a lot of excitement moments around what was happening in Power BI. Over the last couple of years, they've had to like just build out the features, create better features on top of the existing ones. So I felt like the improvements were okay, but they weren't like revolutionary. This was like truly excited about like what's happening here. I was like really, really excited about what's going on.
You've grown a lot.
Why?
You know why?
Gray hair?
Is when I mean, we've all grown a lot in different ways. But no, the when during that time is when you had a singular word you said all the time, and it got to the point where I was like, not everything is that. Not everything is that, Mike. Do you
Game changer.
Yeah. And now like you're using it very sparingly. And even during a very exciting time. So I think that shows a lot of maturity, Mike. You know, you've come a long way. But yeah,
trying to hang around
to your point,
more and enjoy myself.
To your point, that's just a facade. To your point, like, yeah, man, everything was a game changer.
Everything
it was.
Like,
wow, that's such a huge quality of life improvement.
The introduction of bookmarks was a huge shift in like what you could do in the report.
I think either the maturity has grown, or it's just as the immense amount of information we have to consume and how it's going to change the landscape of business. Right?
Yes.
As we implement these strategies, it may come out again. Guys, I've got this solution now in Fabric, and it's a game changer.
Yeah. Yeah.
Honestly,
I foresee a lot of that coming.
This may actually be the only game changer we've actually had if you actually broke down the words, because not to be redundant, but this is literally changing the entire game. While other things were maybe changing a few rules, tweaking things, this is literally like we're almost playing a different sport now.
That's a much better way of looking at it. I think, you're right. Everything else was kind of like a rules changer. And this literally is changing, you know, as opposed to, learn a little bit more DAX. Hey, look, there's a new DAX function, right? Now you're like, by the way, you need to learn how to write a pipeline. By the way, you need to learn Python. By the way, here's things called notebooks. You've never seen these before, but now you can do data engineering on this.
It's a bit like we've been playing tennis, and then someone gives you a baseball bat and says, "Good luck."
Well, baseball doesn't really fall short in my realm, but
well, some of us can.
It's like someone gave you like
wait, what?
Excellent. So we got a couple introductions. So I mean, the community has been abuzz about this, and again, it's one of these things where every blog I see right now is like, so you're overwhelmed with Fabric. Where do you start? How do you learn it? What's going on? So we found a couple of some really helpful content creators generating some really relevant links here.
This is actually like kind of cool. So in chat right now, the question is, I'm going to need to put to a business case through to persuade management to invest in MS Fabric. Where do I even start? We need this. And we actually have Power BI Park with us, who posted a link on LinkedIn, which is a fantastic summary.
Exactly where we're going to go start. With that.
So we're gonna drop that link in the chat, and head over and check out his post, which kind of summarizes like the announcement. He's got a bunch of links there, sessions to watch, which we actually did a reaction video to earlier this week, which was the Christian Wade and Zoe one around empower every BI professional to do more with Fabric. Fantastic video. Yeah, if you want some talking heads in it, you can watch ours. Otherwise, just go watch them. All the Microsoft materials, like the really key top parts, and then underneath that MVP blogs. that have been put out thus far. If you want to go all the way to the end for kind of a comprehensive view, once again, Kurt Bueller crushing it, right? From a, hey, how do you validate all of these thoughts and all of these releases of things that are happening in Fabric that you would want to be aware of, or like the big changing game ones. He's got a PDF and a quick blog, so check out Kurt Bueller's post. But that's also in that LinkedIn article by Power BI Park. So awesome post, NJ, and appreciate that one. But that certainly will help a lot of people kind of just start in different places related to all the different announcements related to Fabric and everything that's come out this week.
I don't know how Kurt can stay on top of things so much. The stuff that he produces, how much he produces, the graphics and the interesting feature, like it's so rich. I just really like his stuff. So I'd highly recommend. There is again, you mentioned it, Seth, but the PDF is really the gem on that blog article from Kurt. There is, and I really liked how he organized it. There is multiple areas that you should be thinking about data stuff, right? So there is the ingest and transform. There's model and analyze. Then we visualize. How do you deploy? Then you think about govern, and then you can consume and take action. So he did a really good job of kind of really, I think these are the core functionalities as to, if you really distilled down BI and BI developments to its essence in these main topics, and then shows you, hey, here's all the tools you need to be aware of that are going to meet these needs in these various ways. So I thought it was really good.
It's funny because we always do. Obviously, we have an agenda for our topics, or that we loosely follow. But I think with the announcements today, like I was trying to write it up, and the only thing I put as a bullet point, what the heck just happened? And because when you look at what Kurt did, when you look at what NJ did, I mean, the amount of content, and not just content, but the amount of probably game-changing features within this, is absolutely incredible. Where I'm not gonna lie, it took me a long time to sleep on Tuesday night too, because I'm trying to navigate the waters. Like, where do we go from here? And that's my big question.
I got to be honest. Tommy kind of called me during or around somewhere in the middle of the conference. He's like, I'm freaking out. What the heck? Do I need to learn all this stuff? I'm like, dude, Tommy, calm down. We're all on the same playing field.
I never get nervous. I never.
But you weren't getting nervous, but it was more like you're like, there's so much to learn now. I feel like how do I keep going? I'm like, I think we're all in the same boat. Honestly, I said I think everyone's feeling this. Very few people, I think, were doing full on data engineering development inside Azure. And what you're seeing now is you're seeing a lot of these. Again, none of these tools are in and of themselves revolutionary, right? Everything has already been out. Yeah. Right? Pipelines, that's Azure Data Factory, right? You have all the other services that are already existing. Maybe they're skinned with a little bit different naming, but now what they're doing is I think the revolutionary part is those are now going to be easily accessible inside the Power BI environment. And so, yeah, I agree. The comments around data flows Gen 2, way better. Yeah. I really like them. And they're cool.
You say this, right? But as you are, I'm thinking about how well prepared we are actually for digesting a lot of Fabric, because it's an ecosystem we're very familiar with.
Right.
We built one.
Delta tables, Parquet.
Yes.
I have one. It's just in the standing platform called Databricks, right?
Like, yeah.
With the exception, so if you think about it, there's 2 points I want to dovetail on. One is, Fabric is very similar to, or at least in my mind, the way Power BI was built, right? You take known things like Power Query, tabular models, and you unify them in a platform that allows you to extend and build visualization. The whole visualization layer was new, right? But the underpinning of those technologies was already there, and then enhanced in that tool. Fabric seems very similar in that regard, not in that they bolted these things together, but I mean they did, but there's an enhancement to these so that it works end to end. And it's in this public preview, right, where we're going to be stress testing whether or not that analytics solution from end to end works the way that we would assume it's going to, but there are a lot more tools and capabilities that are open to a lot more users within ecosystems that have been developer centric that I think are just going to blow the doors off our conversations for a long time, but also be, where we're going to be, walking through some of these challenges and figuring things out as we go along.
I think that's a great point, because up until now, yes, all the tools have been available, but now they're all in one place, one central location,
That's the
which to me
point.
raises the question of, or what kind of expert are you? Are you is now this the expectation to know this, where even if you know all these tooling, it's going to be very hard for one person to say, I'm a Microsoft Fabric expert or I'm a Power BI expert. That line is so much grayer now. We've already struggled on this podcast and with others just to say, what's a Power BI engineer? What's a Power BI developer? What's a Power BI expert? And what that skill level is, what the knowledge is. Seth, you're one of the only people that actually said, here's a knowledge matrix, but that's still, there's no defined titles. There's never have
The new
been.
one, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, there's going to be a little wider columns. But there's never been defined titles in our industry. If you were to say, I need to hire a Power BI expert, that's a wide range. Now that becomes a lot more grayer to me, and I think that's a huge part of this.
I think it's not about the sell, just Alex. I'm a fabricator.
Hilarious.
and I mean,
hey,
yeah.
I guess. So what's interesting to me is like, am I still a Power BIer, or are all of these technologies part of Fabric? And I don't know, right? Are we all fabricators now?
Well, you can't say I'm a Power BI or a Fabric consultant.
I'm still a Power BIer.
Dude, there's so much.
I guess
there's so many good things happening in the chat.
I know, but I want to back up
Alex,
to like the comment I made, right, about us being like in a position where we understand everything that is going on. What do you think specifically, Mike? Right, are some of the core maybe pillars that you're relying on that people who have no idea about these architectures, how things are stored, or the capabilities of some of this Azure or cloud native kind of implementations that are hard to grasp, or people should like first get up to speed on, along with understanding how Fabric works? Does that make sense? Ish.
Yeah. So I'll say, so coming from the world, I've been building. So this, one of the reasons why I'm really excited is this is Microsoft bringing a lot of enterprise tools first and foremost right into Power BI. And this is one of the things that we've very much been talking about on the podcast, is there's lacking this grow up story of, I'm the business, I'm going to hand something to another team and have them work on something. You will notice in Fabric, there is an icon in the bottom left-hand corner that is focused on, hey, there are different user personas that they're trying to incorporate all into PowerBI.com. They're talking about data engineers. They're talking about data scientists. So I think to your question, Seth, directly was, before looking at this world, right? When I was looking at this world as a person who's developed this architecture outside of Power BI, and then at the very last moment I build Synapse, and then I go Power BI to Synapse, boom, I'm happy, right? So I was building enterprise grade architectures around this, and now I see all these things coming into this ecosystem. From an outsider's perspective, seeing this, I'm thrilled, because there's a lot of challenges around connecting these disparate services together in a way that makes everything work. For example, you have Databricks. You've got to link Databricks to your storage account. There's some challenge there. You've got to figure out how to make that mount the directory, mount the folder, so you can actually get the information in there. This new world, all that's just taken care of. If you want to add a VNet around, or a virtual network around all these assets, that gets more complicated as well. So for someone who's coming in brand new, there's been a lot of pain that's already been removed from what this world is looking like. And I think for a new person kind of trying to sit back and learn, okay, where does this stuff fit? How do I start using this? I don't think the community yet understands exactly. There's not yet a white paper. Like, what we need is like eventually the white paper of, here's how to use Fabric efficiently. Here's how to build environments efficiently. There's a lot of things that I think about in the governance space that we now just got introduced to this, but we don't have best practices yet. So,
yeah.
For a new user, I'd say go read up on the Microsoft documentation, go follow their tutorials. Their tutorials are very well done. I think that's going to give you a good mindset around what you're going to build. I do think many organizations need this. Many organizations want this enterprise grade data engineering NBI platform. One thing I'm a bit more skeptical about with Fabric is I'm not so sure how robust it is in the data science space. They keep saying there's this data science persona, and maybe I don't spend as much time on that story right now. I'm focusing more on the data engineering, the data warehousing, but I'm not sure that part of the stories fits very well for me at this point.
Notebooks. That's the big part of that. That's the machine, was going to be the data science side. And it's because
I would disagree with that statement. No, I'll disagree. Notebooks are just as good for data engineering as they are for machine learning and data science.
That's their copycat, basically. They're basically saying, yeah, we can do data science too because we also have notebooks. We have the same infrastructure. Not saying that's a good solution. Just
I would tweak your words slightly. They would say, yes, you can do data science because we have Spark. Yeah. Right? Spark is the thing for data science, right? That would be the engine you'd want to use for.
Well,
that's Python, but but I think Spark is really the linchpin there for machine learning. Where the proof will be in the pudding is where's Microsoft, Auto ML sit in this thing? Where does the cognitive services that Microsoft already has, where do they sit in this world? Yeah. I don't. Yeah. To some, but do you use them? No. Like I don't know. Like they're there, but like, can they think about a better way for that data science persona to build out what that looks like?
And someone's just said they need model registry. I mean, we can import and install modules into our workspace, which is insane kind of thing. Like any module that I want to import in my workspace is not just these default Python modules. So if I want to put pandas AI,
yes,
like that, I can easily incorporate that into the workspace, which will know for any notebook I create in that workspace. So it's a bit technical. I want to jump back on a big point that you said about the best practices.
Sorry.
No. This is all. I mean, there's a lot to unwrap here. To me, I think that's going to be that's the hardest part for people, because where I've been wrapping my brain is it the amount of technology right now that's been released, or is it the lack of roles that is the frustration or the stressor for a lot of people, where it's where do we go from here? And I'm beginning to lean more that it's not so much all the technology and do I have to learn OneLake and I have to learn GenFlows 2 and the infrastructure. I think for me it's, well, where do I fit, or where does an organization fit? Is it the same person doing all of this now? Are there defined roles? This was very different when Databricks and Azure lived in a certain location. And now it's that gap of who's doing what and who should be doing what. That is, to me, the most ambiguous and the stormiest seas, so to speak.
I agree with this.
Yeah, but at the same time, in the same way that Power BI broke the model of business users being stuck in Excel and, in their silos, or not being able to consolidate information and increasing their capabilities to visualize data, isn't this doing the same thing? Like we're opening the door, like it's about what the production of something as opposed to who specifically is doing it. Right. So you've essentially it's made accessible a lot of these backends and the power behind them to generate end-to-end workflows, which if we think about like who's doing the stuff, it's the individuals in the workspace, right? It's the people that are aligned with creating value from data in that particular work stream. I'm not saying that there's not going to be heavy, data engineering or modeling, and now like those work very well or will work very well in this ecosystem because it's all on the same objects, right? And then you have a Power BI user, but if you have Power BI users that are not familiar with a lot of the background conversations that we have in the same enterprise spaces, well, now that door is open, right? Like that door for them to learn those skills is there and pretty accessible right out of the gate, right? The challenge I have, like in my mind, with the current implementation is these are very robust technologies. These are platforms that
Yes,
are designed
that's
to
what I like.
scale and
Yes.
can scale very large, which means you're consuming capacity. But like, do you guys feel like yes, it's accessible? Yes, we have these different tabs that people can create things. We're modifying them, and we have stateful objects in Delta tables. But if I have a lay user that doesn't know what they're doing, and the visibility of how I see these things is just a list,
Yeah.
have you guys seen, is there any sort of hierarchy or tree diagram of how things
Okay.
relate? And this is where
That's
I'm
another
lost,
great
because like
point.
My number one complaint right now
my
is that.
goodness,
Yes.
the amount of objects that are going to be created.
Mhm.
Like, how
Already.
does this not just infinitely turn into a swamp immediately if we don't understand how things are getting built from an admin? I'm not talking about controlling it, but if we're supposed
100%
to
agree with this
manage
one.
what's going on in an ecosystem, I just don't see that visibility right now.
That's a
Yeah.
great point.
Yeah, I definitely think so. Right now, I'm already asking for. They're like in the sessions that come out of build. They're like, what would you guys like? I'm like, I need folders everywhere. Like, I can't have like you click just by creating a lake, right? You turn on Fabric, you turn on a workspace with Fabric attached. Just by making a lake, you get 3 endpoints. That it's the lake,
Yeah.
it's like a SQL endpoint and some other kind of endpoint. I'm like, what the smoke is going on here? Like, this is crazy. That there's already 3 objects created when I just create one thing.
Right.
That's confusing. And so like then when you create a data flow, 3 more objects are created and another 3 were created. So within creating 2 objects, in my opinion, I created a lake and I created a simple data flow. In creating those 2 items, I had all this junk just being immediately created. I'm like, whoa, I don't understand what all this stuff is. I need to get my head around where these things are fitting. And honestly, a lake should be a single object, and you should be able to click on the lake object and be able to say, oh, I want to connect to this lake via these endpoints. Those should just be properties of that single object. So it'll be interesting to see where this is going to go. I think there's going to be some really interesting items here. Oh, you mentioned domains. That just appeared as well at build.
Yeah, that's another big point.
So I was doing a lot of research on this yesterday, and mostly around licensing, because even when Power BI came out, that was my first place to go to. I need to understand how, like, cost, how things are laid out, right, and organized within the ecosystem. And I think from what I read through in the documentation, a domain is a tenant, right? And so it's a 1-to-1 where we used to call it's Power BI tenant, not your Azure tenant, right? So I can create a tenant, which is the capacity, and within there's a one-run relationship with the domain, right? So I have a domain, which is my capacity, and I can have as many, like, multiple workspaces within that domain.
Right.
But so in the same way, it's the same principles we have right now, where I'm assigning a workspace to my capacity, my premium capacities. It's very indicative of like the same sort of architecture there, from the standpoint that I could have as many pro or premium SKUs as I wanted right now, and I divvy up workspaces into different ownership realms, right? So I think they do a really good job of a diagram of how most organizations would work, which is a single tenant, right? A single capacity that has multiple different workspaces within it. And then multiple different domains and tenants. But essentially that's the carving of you're going to have these capacities tied to a domain, and then the workspaces underneath there, I think.
I wasn't aware that you had to tie a capacity to a domain. I thought a domain was more like a grouping of just workspaces.
That's what I believe it is too. And
so you could have a
domain
capacity that spans across domains. It's just like, hey, these are
cross ones.
Capacities tied to a workspace.
So it's the boundary. It's the boundary of the workspaces.
Security.
Workspace group.
I think yes, correct. And the other thing I thought was interesting too. So for example, like finance, right?
Oh, maybe that's where it is. Okay.
Maybe there's like an enterprise, like, so there could be like a P3, right? There's a P3 rolling around inside your environment, right? We need to carve out that P3 to different groups. And the other thing around domains that I thought was interesting, domains have their own properties in the admin portal. So you can give an entire domain the same property. And this is something that I think is missing right now in the admin settings, because if you were going to do, hey, we only want this group of people to export Excel or not export Excel based on the workspace setting, now you can go into a domain and say, okay, here's all the workspaces that belong in this domain. And then once you add them in, then you can immediately turn off the setting for do not allow export in Excel. And it's like a global setting for that entire domain. I think that's going to be incredibly useful. The only downside I see of domains is, okay, great. We're going to have lots of domains appearing, hopefully not. But then how do I know what settings are turned on for each domain? I really would like an API. Actually, I'd like two APIs, right? I'd like one API call to say, give me my tenant settings. What are all the settings across my entire tenant? Just list them out. I don't even need to change them. Just give me a read-only view of that. And then the second thing is now list me all domains and then tell me all the settings for each domain. I don't want to change them. I just want to see them.
Yeah. I think I've with kind of moving past the domains quickly, or unless do you have more with the domains?
No,
So
I don't have
buckets
more.
and groups.
you remember our Mind Trap episode?
Yeah.
And I think for me, it's like I've been really getting much more involved in data engineering the past probably 12 months with Azure, and it's so much. We talked about how easy it is to learn with Copilot, with ChatGPT, with the resources online.
Yeah.
But I think what the intimidating part now, I think for a lot of the people, it's not how to do all this stuff. That's is easily. I don't want to say easily learned, but there's an easy ramp up time. But it's when. Like, when do I create a lake house? When am I going to create a Jupyter notebook? When am I going to do this data engineering in Fabric compared to our normal systems? That to me is the big, I think, question here is not when, not how do I do it, but when do I do it? We are now given a plethora, a buffet of options compared to the Mind Trap of where we had like you had 4 jellies to choose from. We have now 25 different products to choose from. And I think it's like, well, when do I actually create this data engineering in Fabric? Do I do that for all my use cases? When does a business case arise to go through this process? And I think that's a big part here that's unanswered right now.
So all of the doors are unlocked.
Yeah, exactly.
And users will not know where to go.
Right.
Well,
and I think that's a huge
I hope they don't. Right.
This is
the other part of that.
That's what's
I feel like what you're pointing out there, Tommy, I think this is partly intentional by Microsoft to some degree, because I mean, there's this Fabric thing is going to I mean, I'm just looking at a high level here, right? You know, if you have a premium SKU, you're talking more around analysis services, and you're talking about, depending on which premium SKU you're talking about, you get access to the portal or not. P1s, you get access. Everything below that, you don't. Fine. But like now with Fabric, you're getting Azure Data Factory. You're now getting Spark notebooks. You're getting all these other things, these other services that go along with the Fabric piece. There's no way the price can be the same equivalent pricing of what it was in a premium SKU. So there's going to be an increase in spend at some level for using all these other enhancement features around Fabric. So you don't even see that now, and it's going to be here's another thing. Major warning for everyone listening on the podcast. If you are a tenant admin, you must go into your Power BI admin settings. And if you want Fabric to automatically turn on July 1st, it will. So just be very mindful that there's a setting at the very top of your admin settings now that says it's very confusing, the message. The message basically says there's a checkbox that says we are initially turning off Fabric until July 1st. On July 1st, we will automatically turn it on. In order to change this setting, you must acknowledge that you've read this, uncheck the box, and then you can manually turn on or off Fabric. And if you did that, then you can keep Fabric off until you've actually are ready to release it to a group of people or an audience to actually play with or build things around Fabric. So I'd highly recommend, if you are an admin, make sure you go look for that feature in your settings and turn that off. And the other part I'll also put out here too, if you allow users to create, again, users can go get a Fabric trial. So there's another setting in the portal that talks about, can users get a free trial of PowerBI.com? If you leave that setting on and the Fabric is turned on, users will be able to turn on Fabric whenever they want. They'll be able just to light it up. So another feature that I would say is make sure that you are comfortable with what your organization is doing for users can sign up for trials, because there is no pro trial, there is no premium per user trial. When you hit trial, you get a full Fabric, all the things, all the doors are open trial anymore. So those are the two features that are two settings from an admin perspective. I would say check that setting right away.
So Alex, listen, from a Microsoft perspective, Fabric, super powerful, right? Boo, enable Fabric, let your fabricators run wild. Being a guy who is weekly brought into Azure costs in an organization to just wildly say, I'm going to implement this for every business user when they have absolutely no idea what they're spooling up on the back end is fantastic for Microsoft.
Yes.
Not so great for organizations, right? So like, hey, love the enthusiasm. Yes, we want people to leverage and get use of analytics platforms, but to just wildly say that we're going to spool up all this stuff for every user and have my business user who has no idea what they're doing consume all my capacity and me not know why or figure it out on the fly, like that is stuff that we have to solve and figure out during public preview. And frankly, the preview stuff better not just go like boom, instant, like on my production systems. Yeah, I'm talking like IT, but IT acts like the business and everybody pays bills too.
Yeah,
so
the business
before
doesn't
we just
money.
arbitrarily open up all these doors, the business comes to systems and organizational units and says, why are you spending this? Where's my value? Right? So as long as value is produced in these ecosystems end to end, 100%, I'm on board with everything. But to just arbitrarily say during a public preview where we don't understand full costing or anything and understand whether or not public preview is automatically going to roll into production, these sorts of conversations around administrating and letting people know how to turn or toggle things off to protect organizations is absolutely part of the conversation.
That's
you poked me.
But I mean, I think these are all really good points. And again, I think you're right, Seth. If the value is there, if I can do things quicker, easier, faster by having this is more a SaaS offering. Another, to your point there, Seth, as well, right? Another mental shift that's occurring here that I think what Fabric is pushing is there's now this concept of one lake is interesting to me, right? So when you turn on Fabric, this one lake is materialized for you and it's available. So in looking at that, you now have this concept. We don't really have the concept of dev, test, prod anymore. And I think this is an infrastructure push that Microsoft is kind of building now more. And it just kind of comes with a software as a solution, a SaaS offering. You don't really get to pick the hardware for separation of different environments. What Microsoft, I think, is trying to push here, or at least doing here in a easy to use way, right? When we had, so going back a little bit historically here, right? When we had a workspace and we needed to develop things and then push it to an app, we're like, oh, great, this is a mess, right? I was changing a model and I was breaking my app items and assets because the app was pointing to the same data model inside the workspace. So how do we solve that? We use the same Power BI service, but then we made dev, test, prod, and then deployment pipelines showed up. And so now we have this ability to take the same assets and move them from one workspace to another, and that becomes our dev, test, prod. However, the infrastructure on the back end is now all still the same. So it's very interesting to me to see there's a trend here where we don't necessarily build new infrastructures over and over again for these different environments for full separation. Instead, now what we're doing is we're building a service that has a very deeply integrated security element that is segmenting who can access the content or not.
But
it's the security thing. It's the security thing, right? Like, because security is going to have to control like which arena you're in, because
even down to the table level.
To your point, it's the same ecosystem. And and I say previously because Fabric breaks all that, is this idea that but this process by which organizations are physically segmenting data into different compartmentalized systems that have nothing to do with one another, and then you deploy to the next system. So there is never a possibility where production can interact with a test environment or a dev environment, because it's managed and controlled via the separation of those environments. And what this is challenging is this is all the same environment, but we have, like, through permissioning, we're segmenting out which people have access to particular workspaces, right? And then we'll have to figure out the deployment of, like, this data to another ecosystem.
I think the thing you said about cost hit me, Seth, in a different way, because when you think about the adoption of Power BI from both the professional and the organization level, why was that? And it's behavior of cost, where Power BI was free to download and it was free to publish. Yeah, eventually you needed the pro licensing, but to showcase a proof of concept in Power BI was so
Strength.
simple.
Yes.
If we were the VLOOKUP podcast in 2014 and Power BI, right? But like when Power BI came out, it would be like, well, let's just try this Power BI thing out right now and download, and we can test it out and then showcase it. This is not that story with the cost point of view. That's a huge part of this, where like all these parts of the infrastructure are easily, if you start running it after July, it's a cost. So it's going to be very hard to do that development and test and proof of concept.
Yeah, I mean, and that's where I think, like, my first focuses are going to be around just being able to identify what parts of the organization are doing things, but at the same time, like, that should align to different workspaces and whatnot.
Yeah.
So I do like Mike's point, though, and there was something that you were saying in the different technology stacks, or something that, like, this, if we think about Azure Data Factory, Synapse, usage of Databricks, or even they're simplifying some of this in their ecosystem, even in their solutions, it's very technical. You still have to set things up.
Yes.
Where this is challenging my thinking of how we even do enterprise things, because we've been talking about Fabric from the business side, but there's obviously the enterprise component of this, right?
Yes.
As data engineers and developers,
repos,
building
Git,
things,
check-ins, yes.
Sure.
Rollbacks.
Is this, to me, is and I haven't fully grokked it yet, but new vernacular around capacities and SKUs, and we obviously need to understand cost. But what this does even further is obfuscate or simplify core infrastructure things that we've had to set up to make things work, right? So even as we interact with, like, okay, we see ADF as part of this, Synapse, Warehouse, Lakehouse. Yes, there's different components to all these things, but it's very easy, right?
Yes.
And once we understand the underpinnings of how that gets delivered, costs around them, permissioning, etc., like, I do love the fact that it's like the next step of removing users from this configuration hell, or like modification of different versions, or do you have the right clusters, or do you have the right things set up for optimal performance and cost. And maybe Microsoft's figured that all out in here, albeit we'll have to trust the process here as far as, like, optimization of all of these pipelines, to the point where that's being auto handled for us, and all we really need to care about is the data. Because if we think about it, all of that infrastructure is just a byproduct of us wanting to manipulate and manage data. And if that's simplified in a form that's digestible and or acceptable to business, then that absolutely accelerates our jobs, right? From the standpoint of, I've got to do this thing. Now I just navigate through these different things. I spool up the, like, new pipeline, new lakehouse, modify it, move it, bam, it shows up in my reports. Like, the time to delivery is a massive business objective, right?
Yes.
And this would greatly simplify it. So I see the value. Absolutely. It's 100%. Just there's core parts of this that we've got to vet, we've got to figure out, we've got to understand along the way.
Now this does raise.
To me, this. I was gonna say, this is the first time I'm seeing, like, the next piece here, where this really does feel like the Power BI grown up story, right? So, two things we didn't really touch on yet is the Git integration that's coming with desktop and the workspaces.
Yeah.
That's a huge enterprise solution. that needs to be there if we're talking like adoption of like IT or other organizations, or you're talking certified content. Those pieces of elements make a ton of sense in the space. Now also looking at the direct lake connection, right? I've already been building for years for these companies. I've been building years. I've had Delta tables all over the place in my lake already. Yeah. So now to bolt those things on and bring them right to Power BI, I'm super excited about what that. So again, to your point, Seth, this is adding a lot of really core functionality that's bringing a lot of value to. I can see the value right now with a whole lot less configuration, with a whole lot less effort to get started. I'll still need some time to figure out how does proper administration and governance look like. And then again, as leaders in this space, we're trying to figure out, okay, how do we not let this thing just turn to a mess, right? I don't want it to be a mess that way. Right. It is effective. There's value could be added, but we don't want it to be so crazy that it just falls apart and then no one can maintain it or use it.
Correct.
So Tommy, you're trying to get me to hold off there. You got some other thoughts?
Well, no, I disagree, but yeah, I think there's a question we have to ask and we need to answer before any of this really gets deployed. And to me, it's where does this fit with upstream in terms of if you were to think of Roach's maximum, is this now the upstream part? If a business user or even this is not a citizen developer doing notebooks, sorry. But from building the one lake, building this
is the upstream part.
This still would count in the same
like Spark,
fashion, then.
Databricks,
right.
SQL Server. Like these are the upstream sources that we were talking about. Okay, you're doing more. Like you can do more of those transformations in those spaces, and now you're even like, so for example, like Direct Lake, I don't need Power Query in the Direct Lake experience per se. I could use it if I want to. I can go get data and put it down to the lake as a Delta table. So I may use Power Query to generate the Delta table, but there's a whole area here that is like the upstream things of Matthew Roach's comment. They're now inside Power BI as a data engineering story, or as a data science story, or as a pipeline. These are all things that were enterprise grade that are now being brought to our normal ecosystem of Power BI. So I'm really excited for that story.
So this all would, in a sense, qualify just in the same way if you're building in Databricks or in Synapse or in Azure. This would still qualify to the same level if you're building this in Direct Lake.
I don't understand your question there.
So from the upstream point of view, from the data engineering point of view, if you're building this in Databricks or you're doing the things in a lake in Azure, this still qualifies to that same level. It's still the same credit, in a sense, credentials, the same qualification.
This is enterprise.
Okay.
I was going to say this is like if things you're going to build in these pipelines, things you're going to build in Spark notebooks, thing you're going to build in One Lake as Delta tables. Sure. This is the same. I would be building this exact same material.
You'd be
just using different tools. I'm already building it today. I've been building it for years. I've already been doing Azure Data Factory. I've already been doing Spark. I've already been doing Databricks, right? These are all things I've already been using, and they're proving themselves for years now that this works. It's solid. Businesses find value from it. And I'm actually seeing trends now of stuff that we've built, proof of concepts, minimal viable products, where companies are now removing analysis services in Azure, getting rid of it. They're removing SQL Server, or talking about removing SQL Server from their architectures to go more towards the lake, more towards what we have built out here. So again, I think this pattern is very robust, and I think many large organizations with lots of data are very comfortable using this type of architecture.
What's interesting to me though is the persona of create a lakehouse and the persona of create a warehouse, are those just the UIs now? Like ultimately, because all of the artifacts in One Lake are Delta tables, right? So isn't it just, hey, you have your flavor and you're used to these ways of interacting with data, but we're storing it the same way? So realistically, like there's no difference in terms of like how, like to me, a Azure SQL Warehouse, it was a SQL Server, right?
Yes.
If I'm playing in the lake, I'm creating the file types and the Delta tables that I care about. But now, since everything's a Delta table, isn't it just the interaction of how I work with the data on that object? Because like to Justina's walkthrough in one of the I think the keynote, or Arun and Amir's session, right? I create a SQL table, or I'm in the warehouse section and I build out a table and I have a bunch of data and some of it's, got GUIDs in it. So she jumps over to the lakehouse to run a Jupyter notebook and clean up the data, goes right back to where she was, and it's cleaned. So it's the same object under the covers in one lake.
Yes.
So realistically, or is this just like two different paths where we have, hey, you're familiar with this scenario and interacting with data, and you're familiar with this, but in reality, it's the same thing.
Same format.
I think that's the question I was asking. Is it the same output? And it's not necessarily the same output, but it's just a different UI, but it's going to qualify as the same, because what you do in the data engineering space in Azure Databricks, that's not just for Power BI and for reporting.
And this
that goes out to business.
Yeah. And this is where this is where my familiarity with the technology stacks underneath the covers is getting challenged, right? Because we believe that there is a fundamental need for people to understand how this stuff works. And now I'm being challenged. Like, does it matter? Right? Is it, or is it just getting simplified so much? And it matters from like, what are you spooling up? But at the same time,
I see
like,
your question.
Like in the same way that in 2 podcasts ago, I was like, hey, if you want to work in the cloud and you were a SQL DBA and 90% of your resume is how you manage, SQL servers on premises, that's not applicable to me. So is a lot of the things I know about these technology stacks not applicable anymore because it doesn't really matter? It's possible.
Oh boy, this is okay. You're opening a can of worms here on this one.
So the base understanding of these systems and how they work is good. How we've operated in our like Synapse platform, Databricks platforms, like all that is it's good knowledge. We now know like deeper questions. We can validate things, understand where it's coming from, but at the same time, like this simplifies a lot of that tech stack, hypothetically.
So I think to your point there is a portion of this that is this is simplifying a lot of what we need to understand. Part of a software as a service is there's a lot of things under the hood that are happening, like security, networks, linking things together. Like this is part of the reason why I had problems with not problems. These are one of the more friction-based pieces of building this architecture on your own. I got to get all the things that talk together. I got to get service principles built around. I got to
figure a bunch of things. Yep.
Correct. So from that perspective, there's a lot of like technical pieces that are being removed because it makes sense. This is a pattern where these services make sense to be brought together because they should be together. In lieu of that, also, I'll also add, you need I think there will always be a deeper technical part of what we're trying to accomplish, right? For example, like a Delta table, there may be a partition schema that is somewhat more efficient than a not efficient partition schema on how you read the data, or how do you secure information based on role of security from Power BI reports down to the direct lake, what that looks like, right? That's not out yet. That's not a feature they have today. So there always will be another layer deeper that's more technical in nature. But I think to your point, Seth, most of what Fabric is trying to do is to try and bring many of these very technical pieces and bring it up a level. Okay, we don't need to write code. We don't need to go into Azure Active Directory and build a bunch of service principles. We can now just click a button, and then a lot of that happens for us automatically. So I feel like the trend here is there is a portion of this where we're talking about this feels like the Power Query UI that's generating a whole bunch of code where we are able to interact with a couple button clicks and we are able to move a lot more code all at once. Behind that, there's still an ability to see a lot of extra code, right? You're going to have SQL endpoints. You're going to have other stuff you want to do. You're getting more feature-rich capabilities on the back end, but for 80 to 90% of your workloads, you don't probably need to go touch all that. But there will be individuals in your company or very technical leaders that are going to get really deep into this and be able to really tune and optimize on top of this.
I mean, I'm excited about it, right? Because ultimately, the only reason that organizations invest in infrastructure or architectures is because it solves some of the data problems that they need, right? Like they need value out of these systems. And in the long run, like I think Fabric is an amazing like new kind of way in which we can interact with data and provide that value faster. And it's an accelerator, I think, of in many cases where it challenges the status quo. And what's interesting, not interesting, amazing about it is it's absolutely challenging the status quo of how things are done on an enterprise level, and throwing in and unifying the business into an ecosystem that, like, if Power BI challenged IT, this absolutely just smashes it. If organizations let it ride, it does.
I had that direct thought when I was at the end of watching some of these build sessions. I walked upstairs and tried to get a drink, and I need a break. My mind's just spinning right now of all the things, and I thought there are some IT individuals right now that are rolling over in their seats. They are just livid with, what is this? Why are we like? I could just totally see like this traditional thinking of IT controls all this. We hold all the data. Like, again, I've been saying this for years, that I think the traditional role of IT has been shifting from we manage infrastructure to we now manage access and accessibility of information and data. And the role of having to have a team from the business go into IT and say, hey, I need you to produce this table, that is becoming less and less applicable. And with Fabric, this makes a huge implication for, the business now doesn't need IT to build you a SQL server. I don't need you to build me I can build my own lake. I can build my own tables. I can do my own shaping of data however I want. And I don't need the IT group to kind of jump in. Now, will that process be 100% optimized? Will that process be very performant? Proof is in the pudding here. We'll have to see how this pans out over time. I think you're going to need to we will have potentially the same problem that we do in Excel, right? We give everyone Excel, they go do all their own data things, and there's a wide experience range of people who can do very efficient things in Excel and people who are doing very inefficient things in Excel. Regardless, they're getting to the same answer. And so now we have to kind of start questioning is, all right, how much effort are we spending to maintain these more archaic things? And does that make sense? And do we need to have time in our projects to come back, optimize, reload, and clean?
What is becoming, I think, more apparent to me is and I think it was a keynote or quote somewhere where they, one of the early adopters in private preview, I think, was a chief data officer who was like, I'm excited about becoming, like, actually being a chief data officer and not being a chief integration officer. Because if you think about, like, even in ecosystems today, essentially, like, there's a lot of integration that we're trying to manage. Like, you're trying to connect to all these systems. You're trying to, like, pull these data sets together to start to do something with it. And this starts to poke or break down those bridges because it reduces like I said, it reduces the time to actually getting to the data points that we can start to interact with and manipulate and work with.
And what a great opportunity, honestly, for the people who've been working in BI for so long, where we talked about that grow up story, where if there's anyone that's more in line or in position to really make use of this, is the person who's been that blend of understanding what the business needs, but understanding the technology. That limitation's been, I understand you try to standardize this. I don't have access to that because I'm not an IT. And now, like, Mike, to your point, I can go in 30 minutes, be able to build something very structured using the knowledge and the skills I already have, but I'll build this upstream and do this in a way where hey, marketing, sales, you're trying to create your, your quota table that's been in Excel, and we created in Power BI, but it only exists there. Well, now I can actually make this exist in multiple locations. It's the output here that is going to be the biggest win, where we have the skill. And there's some things to learn, but again, rather than me creating something that was siloed in a single report, now I can have it actually exist in an upstream area where I have that knowledge of what the business, that department needs are, and how to standardize from a tabular, from an ERD system or a diagram, and I can create that now upstream. So if there's anyone who's in better position, it is a BI developer, because they have the knowledge of both.
Yeah, and now I think the opportunity is now larger. And so we were talking about data analysts before. I think we now have the capability of taking a data analyst and growing into a data engineer / analyst now. I think there's more capability in the skill set now.
I don't even know if that's going to be the appropriate title, because again, it's understanding those business needs. I can't tell you, even in the last 4 months, projects and some clients I've worked on where they're like, in order for us to get this structure, we have to go and request this IT, and it takes about 3 months for them to actually put this in their data lake. And it's like, okay. And that kind of that push, it's like, all right, let's do this in Power Query in a data flow so we can have that structure. But now again, good and bad, there's kind of the fruit here is as a mix. But now I can create that structure because I understand the business. My job has been that blend, the think like business, act like IT. My job has to be a liaison for both worlds.
That's the key. I think this is the key. Is this tool is an enabler for someone to stand squarely in IT and squarely in the business and communicate across those boundaries. And that was the linchpin of that was Power BI. Power BI was the linchpin to have that initial conversation. This is a tool that can be used 100% by the business and 100% by IT. Both teams need this, and we're doing data work from one side, and we're now doing the Power BI report building from the other side. And now I liken this to you're building a bridge from two sides, and you need to meet in the middle. And a lot of times, I think this is a better bridge system of being able to find the data, engineer the data, and produce it. There hasn't been a single project I've ever been on that has that you can connect to the transactional system, and the data is already in the form you need for reporting. Like it's just never there.
Exactly.
There's every project I've ever been on, there's always a data transformation step or data engineering step that needs to be applied in order to get the data ready for a cube, a model that could be used inside a Power BI report.
It's amazing what we've created. Yeah, go ahead.
I think ultimately, in terms of there's so much more to talk about, and I really want to talk about like some of the different. I'll save the top because I don't want to derail. I think what's exciting to me about Fabric and why it is unlike other individualized Azure services, like people are talking about ADF, Synapse, is what we talked about. You have to know how to configure those things. You have to set them up in an appropriate way, and those doors or those barriers to entry are removed with this service. And when you do that, this falls into the same argument we make all the time about opening up methods for us to have a community, right? Engage. Mike, you talk about this in like DAX custom functions, or allowing us to do things.
Help
right?
us. Let us help you.
Let me do something, right? Fabric opens that door to business users, and absolutely people are going to take advantage of leveling themselves up from an analyst to a developer or whatever, because it's not about having to have an understanding of setting up these systems and being able to configure them and being in an environment that understands like how you would work within this ecosystem of this pulling data from here and then like shaping it. Do all those principles still align? Yeah, but you just remove the barrier for them having to go figure it out or get access to that thing, and they can go build it and figure it out as they go. So it's an enabler. It's enabling many more users within an organization to solve data problems. And I think that's what's fundamentally different, and also like drives the fundamental concerns or this rapid discovery from all of us to try to understand what does that mean, because Microsoft with Power BI did it, right? And holy cow, we've been talking about it for 5 years as far as like how do we adapt, how do we adjust. This is almost feels like a reset, because it's like, oh my gosh, you just opened this door to a whole lot more people to solve data problems faster and quicker. What does that mean? How do we manage this? How do we build solutions around this? Because it is different than all of these other tools as separate things that had separate people and separate roles. And now you're saying, hey, if you have the chutzpah, right? I don't even know if that's a valid word for this, but if you have the drive, go do it.
Yeah. Yep. I agree with this.
So the last thing I'll say, and by the way, great therapy session, guys, today for all this. But just talk it through. But the last thing I'll say is, I think for those, you hear a lot of this on LinkedIn. And I think even me initially too is like, what do I have to learn now? Yeah, I was nervous, but my job is to learn things on the fly. Like my things are going to be an expert in new technology that's always coming out. This is just this is no different. Yeah, it's a little more expanded, but I think the biggest opportunity, and again, honestly, we are in the best position. This is perfect for the BI developer because the skill that's harder to learn is something we've always talked about, is that empathy, and that's still a huge part of this. And now I now have more of the technology available to solve so many more problems. I have so much of understanding what is the business needs are, what are they trying to accomplish, and now I have that technology to solve that in so many more ways.
Oh man. Okay, so yeah, I like that. That's a great question, a great response there, Tommy. And I'm already moving on to what does Chat GPT say? So we're gonna do a couple of responses here. So I'm now mixing a little bit here. I'm doing a little bit of Bing Chat, and I'm also doing a little bit of like regular Chat GPT, because I know Bing Chat actually is able to scan the internet for recent articles and things and kind of use the internet as well. So my question to Bing Chat was imagine you're a business user working on a large enterprise organization. What are your main opinions about the newly released Microsoft Fabric services for Power BI? And it gives a very nice kind of high level, Microsoft Fabric is an end-to-end human-centered analytics experience. Okay, fairly good. This is what I thought was interesting. It pulls out two websites. According to Radicad, so Radicad, you get a call out today. You are in Bing Chat. According to Radicad, the analytical power of the service provides data analysts to do more preparation, more data modeling, and more calculations. The combination of the visualization and Power BI gives more insights to the users. So a pretty reasonable answer there. I thought that was really good. Another call out from ChatGPT was Datamark. Datamark also got a call out. So Datamark explains that the options are now to build reports directly in the Power BI service in workspaces, and you can now easily create data sets and build reports on top of them using the Fabric service. So I felt like that was a pretty good answer. Didn't give me good opinions there. And then I went over and I asked the same question to regular ChatGPT, and it said, "I'm just an AI engine. I can't do things." and then it gave me at least some answer. And I said, it did a good job of giving a brief summary. Microsoft Fabric is a component-based framework designed to provide consistent user experience across Microsoft products, which I thought that was a good way of putting it, right? There are many products that have different looks and feels. This is trying to unify all that into one platform. Okay, I agree with that one. And then it kind of gave what it thought was the bullet points around why you'd want to use Fabric, right? So first one was it has an enhanced visual appeal. Okay, the response. It has consistency across the Microsoft ecosystem. And I thought that was a good point. You're now looking at the same portal, the same page. I'm not jumping around Azure and workspaces and all things. So I like that point. I thought that was very well built. An improved user interface experience. It offers a wide range of customizable components. You can build your tailored engineering systems for data, and then it aligns with dashboards and building in Power BI. I thought that was a fairly well-worded answer as well. This is something that was interesting here. The learning curve and adoption of the new framework could present challenges for business users. But its point, it says, while the features are exciting, it may challenge others and find it time-consuming to learn these new technologies. I thought that was very relevant as well. And then lastly, there could be potentially compatibility and integration challenges. When adopting new services or frameworks, compatibility integration with existing systems potentially present some challenges. Business users maybe have concerns around how do they integrate Microsoft Fabric with their existing Power BI reports, their existing data sources, and their existing customizations already in the system. Yep. I thought that was a very insightful element as well, because that's what we're kind of struggling with. Like, hey, there's this new world. How do we integrate this new Fabric thing in what we're already doing in Power BI and what we already know? So we need some guidance around how do we take what we have and get to the next level. Anyways, really interesting answers today. I thought actually, all right, I'll have to score it today. I'm probably going to I'll probably give it around an 800 out of 1,000 for me.
So an 8 out of
10. Sure. 801.
I'll do 6 out of 7. I mean, for something that came out 2 days ago, great job. And I actually personally am giving it an extra score because out of all the AI stuff, it's like, look, I don't even know Microsoft Fabric. Don't ask AI. Like, I can't.
Exactly right. What do you think, Seth? How was their responses today?
Yeah, 6 out of 7 is good.
6 out of 7 is
Tommy.
good.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Well, with that, thank you very much. We appreciate your time today, everyone. Thank you for listening and jumping in. The conversation in the chat thread was amazing. Thank you so much for having opinions, options, and considerations here. I'm learning so much from chat and your perspective on things. So, chat, thank you very much for participating. We really appreciate you jumping in and joining the conversation as well. Our only ask is if you like this episode, you like what we do here, please share it with somebody else. We'd love to have someone else get involved with the conversation. That's what this is for. Tommy, where else can you find the podcast?
So you can find the podcast anywhere they're available, Apple and Spotify. Make sure to subscribe. What do you want us to talk about, Fabric? Go to PowerBI.tips/the podcast. We have a forum. So ask your questions. What do you want us to talk about with Fabric and all these new features? Make sure to watch live as well on Tuesdays and Thursdays, 7:30 a.m. Follow all Power BI Tips social media channels.
Sounds good. Thank you all very much. And there'll be many more months of talking about Fabric and how we work with it. And we're going to have a lot. Tommy was worried we were running out of content last week. And he's like, no, not now. He's never worried about that, actually. We always have things to talk about. Thank you all and have a great time. We'll see you next time.